What is going on, everybody? What is going on? The Catch fam, my name is John Dawson, and in today's video, we are breaking down the best waiver wire additions for week 8 of the 2023 fantasy football season. If you guys are new to the channel, this is all we do here all year round: free fantasy football content, redraft, dynasty, and best ball. If you guys are into that, be sure to subscribe on the way in. But more importantly, please get in the comment section down below anything that you guys need pertaining to the 2023 fantasy football season. Let me know: starts, sits, trades, roster reviews. What do you need to do for the waiver wire this week? Whatever it may be, let me know and I'll get back to you as soon as I possibly can. Also, be sure to check out Underdog's newest Underdog Pick'em tip-off special with LeBron James just needing to score a point. Pair that with any NFL, NBA pick'ems, whatever it may be, and use promo code DCatch to double your deposit up to $100. And for a limited time, if you sign up going through tomorrow night, the 24th, and you are a new member, Underdog is going to double your deposit up to $500. And there will be plenty more of these specials throughout the year. So just remember, promo code DCatch if you guys are checking out Underdog Pick'ems. But without further ado, let's hop into today's video. All right, first on the list, we've got Daryl Henderson, who ended up being essentially the lead back for the Rams in week 7. It's worth noting that Royce Freeman did pretty good off 12 touches, 66 yards on the ground, 5.5 yards per carry. But Henderson, knowing this offense, had a little bit of an advantage: 18 touches, 61 yards on the ground, 8 touchdowns, 2 targets, and reception. Just looked a little bit better as a fit in the offense. But hey, I mean, let's face it, both these guys are probably going to get touches, and there's always the chance that maybe Zach Evans or Myles Gaskin gets involved while Kyron Williams is out. But we know he's out until at least week 11 after the Rams bye in week 10. So we're looking at a matchup against Dallas and Green Bay. Obviously, that matchup against Green Bay a little bit better, but hey, this Rams unit offensively, they do want to utilize the run game on top of throwing the football. And let's face it, like I said, Henderson was essentially the guy. He's 36% rostered according to the Sleeper app. So I think when we're looking at this committee, you know, it's still a little bit risky, but he's absolutely worth picking up moving into week 8. Oh my goodness. Up next, we've got Ezekiel Elliott himself. He's now scored in 2 straight games. 11 touches this past week, as well as 7 touches in week 6, compared to Ramondre's 9 touches and 10 touches. But worth noting that Ramondre has had at least 6 targets in the last 2 games. So it's not like Zeke is necessarily, stepping in front of Ramondre Stevenson on the depth chart or anything, but he's been involved enough. And man, I mean, the injuries have been so brutal this year to the running back position that some of you guys are going to have to consider Ezekiel Elliott, currently rostered in 50% of fantasy leagues according to Sleeper, but he gets a nice matchup against Miami in week 8, a little bit of a tougher matchup at home against Washington in week 9 before another good matchup in week 10 against the Indianapolis Colts, and then a bye week in week 11. So Zeke, a low ceiling, but hey, he's worth a pickup, like I said, because there's just so many brutal injuries to running backs currently. So Zeke, give him a shot if you're desperate enough moving into week 8. All right, next up, we've got Amari of the Arizona Cardinals. Listen, I'm still really leery of this pickup, but 13 touches, 5 targets. But when we compare that to the rest of the Cardinals backfield, Keontae Ingram not involved at all. 0 touches, 0 targets. Damian Williams, 1 touch, 2 rushing yards. So for what it's worth, DeMarcado was the lead back in week 7. Could I see this fluctuating, kind of going up and down? Yeah, and there are 2 steep matchups against Baltimore and Cleveland in the next 2 weeks for the Cardinals run game. But hey, like I said, it's a tough time to be a fantasy manager. There's so many injuries to the running back position. At this point, DeMarcado is 20% rostered, did nothing in week 6 after filling in nicely for James Conner in week 5. Showed up again in week 7, so he's at least worth a shot moving into week 8. All right, next up, we've got Taj Spears, who got dropped in a lot of leagues because he was on bye week in week 7, so now he's down roster to just 50% according to the Sleeper app. So listen, not the best matchup against Atlanta in week 8, but while Atlanta has been good against the run, they've kind of struggled against pass-catching running backs. And when we look at Taj Spears' last 2 starts, just 1 reception in week 6, but he showed that explosiveness, turned it into a 48-yard gain. And in week 5, he had 4 receptions off of 5 targets for a total of 35 yards, 8.7 yards per catch. So this is kind of a good matchup for the style of running back that Taj Spears is. And on top of that, he's still a phenomenal handcuff. I mean, maybe the best handcuff in the league right now. We kind of know that he's still going to be boom or bust, right? But I still think he's someone you can throw in as a desperate RB2 or a desperate flex. And like I said, this upcoming matchup should work for him. And he's just a fantastic handcuff who got dropped in a lot of leagues. So go check if he's available. I do think he's worth the addition as we move into week 8. All right, moving on to a few wide receivers. Let's start with Josh Downs, a little bit higher rostered at 52%, but I felt like he should still be included because in full PPR leagues, at this point, he needs to be rostered. Since week 3, he's hit double digits in every single game, except for week 4 against the Rams. He's coming off of his best fantasy performance against the Cleveland Browns in week 7, 23.5 fantasy points, 125 receiving yards, a touchdown off of 5 receptions. It has not mattered if Anthony Richardson's at quarterback or Gardner Minshew. As a matter of fact, no knock to Anthony Richardson, but I think that it may be better if Gardner Minshew is at the quarterback position for Josh Downs. He gets the Saints, the Panthers in the next 2 weeks. Not the best matchups, but hey, this is one of those wide receivers who has a player like Michael Pittman in front of him. So a little bit less defensive pressure. He's really making the most of his opportunities. He's a top 30 wide receiver in fantasy football right now. He absolutely needs to be rostered. He should be a priority waiver wire add moving into week 8. All right, next up, we've got another New England Patriot in Kendrick Bourne. I mean, he's currently a top 30 wide receiver. He's had double digits in the last 2 weeks, 6 receptions off of 7 targets, 63 receiving yards, and a touchdown in week 7. 16.3 fantasy points after having 19.3 fantasy points in week 6. He gets a good matchup this week against Miami, another good matchup against Washington, then another good matchup against the Colts. So the next 3 weeks look bright. I'm a little bit hesitant because the Patriots have had 2 good games in a row, at least from a fantasy football perspective, but the 4 weeks before that, they were performing like the worst offense in the entire league. But like I said, a couple good matchups coming up here. Kendrick Bourne, I think, is looking like a player that we can trust in terms of the Patriots wide receiver room from a fantasy football perspective. So listen, he's 39% rostered. I do think that he should be picked up. I always say bad offenses still produce good fantasy football players, especially in full PPR formats. So go check if Kendrick Bourne's available. I definitely think he's worth at least a bench spot on your roster moving into week 8. All right, next up, we're going to talk about Dalton Schultz at the tight end position. Currently the tight end 9 in fantasy football, even with not playing in week 7. He has had double-digit fantasy performances 3 weeks in a row in weeks 4, 5, and 6. A little bit higher rostered at 61%, but I talked about Dalton Schultz a lot going into week 7. Told you guys if he gets dropped in your league due to the bye week, if he goes unnoticed due to the bye week, pick him up. We know that this Texans offense is going to throw the football a ton. This is what they want to do. They trust CJ Stroud. Stroud trusts Dalton Schultz. Like I said, 3 touchdowns in his last 3 games. It's Carolina, Tampa Bay, Cincinnati. I don't really care about the matchups. In week 6, he scored against one of the best teams in the league against the tight end position in the Saints. Listen, go check if Schultz is available. I know there's enough issues at the tight end position right now. He absolutely deserves to be rostered. I got another tight end for you, and in some leagues, a quarterback or tight end, so might be helpful if you're in a super flex league. But nonetheless, Tamm Hill is your tight end 15 in fantasy football right now, and he's rostered in just 13% of fantasy leagues. Double digits in the last 2 weeks. He's going to be facing the Colts, the Bears, and the Vikings. All good matchups for him. 16.8 points in week 7, 12.2 points in week 6. Listen, whenever it comes to Taysom Hill in fantasy football, I always tell you guys, expect disappointment. You never know when you're going to get 3 points or 18 points, whatever it may be, but we have to look at the numbers here. He's worth rostering. A couple soft matchups coming up. Derek Carr's play hasn't been extraordinary. They're getting Taysom Hill more involved. And on top of that, when we're looking at the tight end position, Juwan Johnson's been a little bit banged up, did not play last week. I don't know what's happened to Jimmy Graham. And I don't think that the Saints are going to be trusting Foster Moreau anytime soon after that Thursday night game against the Jaguars. So Taysom Hill, worth picking up. But hey, expect a little bit of up and down play, as always, with Hill moving into week 8. All right, one last running back I want to talk about is Joshua Kelly. Been dropped in a lot of leagues, 23% rostered, was not a guy we could trust whatsoever. While Austin Eckler missed time, Eckler's been back the last 2 weeks, but his ceiling's been really low. 10.2 fantasy points, 5.6 in the last 2 weeks. Listen, I'm not ultimately worried about Austin Eckler, but it is worth noting that maybe this injury has affected him a little bit. And Joshua Kelly's still a good handcuff, even though we couldn't really trust him when he was starting for Eckler. But where I do think Joshua Kelly plays better is when Austin Eckler is healthy and suiting up. I mean, we saw that in week 1 when Joshua Kelly had 15.1 points. We saw it last week when he had 13.5 points. Granted, really it was a, one long touchdown run that gave him those fantasy points, but listen, the next couple matchups are pretty good. Chicago and the Jets, a tough matchup against Detroit, then another good matchup against Green Bay. So I do think there's going to be some opportunities here for Joshua Kelly, especially in this next matchup against the Bears. So Josh Kelly, if you're in a deeper league, if you're struggling at running back, which I know a lot of you guys are, if you got hit with any injuries, Jerome Ford, whatever it may be, take a look at Josh Kelly. He at least gives you a shot moving into week 8. Last but not least, I've got Gerald Everett, who, listen, he did get hurt in this game, had a quad injury, had to leave. He's questionable as of now, but I really think that Gerald Everett is a player at the tight end position we need to take a stronger look at. He's the tight end 16 in fantasy football right now, but really, ever since Mike Williams suffered that injury, he started to see more and more involvement outside of week 4 against Las Vegas. Didn't have a good game there, but in week 3, 9 points against Minnesota. Bye week in week 5, like I said, the poor game in week 4, but week 6 scored a touchdown against Dallas. Then last week against Kansas City also scored a touchdown. If you go back to last year, there's a good, chemistry between Justin Herbert and Gerald Everett. I think that's something that could continue to form this season. And tight end position, just as much of a wasteland as it was last year. A couple good matchups coming up for Gerald Everett. Chicago, the Jets, Detroit, all have been bad against the tight end position. So I think Gerald Everett, if you're in a bad position at the tight end spot, I think he's absolutely worth paying attention to. Like I said, he's questionable at the moment to play in week 8, but if he suits up, I think he's a pretty solid streaming option. And as always, like I said, tight end's just a complete wasteland outside of Travis Kelce, Mark Andrews, whatever it may be. So take a look at Gerald Everett if you need to, approaching week 8. And that'll do it for today's video. If you guys did enjoy the content today or find it helpful, be sure to subscribe on the way out. This is all we do here all year round. Free fantasy football content, redraft, dynasty, and best ball. But please let me know in the comments down below if you guys need help with anything moving into week 8. If you guys have any fantasy questions, whatever it may be, starts, sits, trades, who should you target on the waiver wire based on your roster, whatever you guys need, I'm here to help and happy to help as soon as I possibly can. I will be sure to get back to you. But with all that said, that'll do it for today's video. Thank you guys so much for watching and or listening. And remember, you saw it here on The Catch.